Oops. Okay, so Book of Isaiah, it follows the wisdom section of Scripture in our Bibles, at least in this version of in this formatting arrangement of the text. It comes after the wisdom section, so right after the Book of Song of Songs, and it leads off the prophet section. Also, one of the things I was doing during those 5 weeks that I was preparing for this is I was coming up with a bunch of Old Testament sources and citations that I'll be mentioning as we go through this, because it's important to note, and also one of the things I'll do, and I'll probably do this later. I'll probably do this kind of maybe even after I finish Isaiah, is I'll also go through a list of New Testament quotations of Isaiah, because the New Testament quotes Isaiah more than I think any other book in the Old Testament, I think. Except maybe Deuteronomy. It's quoted a lot, or referred to at least. And so it helps to know, and remember, the prophets themselves didn't always know what they're talking about. It's like they would speak in these figurative languages about these things that were mysterious even to them. And so that we need the New Testament to guide us into fully understanding what they were saying, because it's only in the New Testament that the prophecies and the statements of the prophets get their fullest revelation that comes from God, saying this is what they really meant. Okay, now they had some understanding of their own, like I mentioned the stuff with Ahaz and the virgin sign, but some of these things, so there are things that they understood that meant something practical in their day, but they also had future fulfillments that were well beyond their time that they did not know about until the apostles revealed it in the New Testament times. But they also spoke about, and this is something that we need to understand. I mentioned this before with the other prophetic books, and I've been doing this with these prophetic books so far. These prophets didn't speak in a vacuum. They didn't just make stuff up. We can read through these prophets and just go through page after page of just this figurative, hyperbolic language, and to the point where our eyes just kind of roll. But you have to understand that these prophets were speaking to the people about specific things that they were doing that were breaking specific laws that God had given them. So it wasn't abstract. They didn't deal with abstractions. They weren't talking. It sounds abstract to us. It sounds very general, because we're so far removed from this culture, and we don't live in that culture, and we didn't live in the context of those times. So when they start talking about these things, and they use their figurative imagery, and they talk about these geographical things around them, it can seem very bland and generic and conceptual to us, or abstract. But they're referring to specific things that the people were doing that broke specific laws or went against specific things God had told them to do. Or in some cases, the prophets would refer to specific geographical features in their land that they knew about, that they understood because they knew these things. They saw them. They saw them with their eyes. So these prophets weren't dealing with this in abstractions. They weren't talking about things that are impossible to understand. Now, yeah, they did speak about, they did use figurative language to speak about this great, glorious future that was to come. But they also spoke about very abstract things, very, very specific things the people were doing that were breaking specific laws that God had left for them. And we need to be aware of that. Wherever we can, we need to be aware of that, which is why I have all these different, sources and citations handy, so that we can go back to the Old Testament and find the spot that, find what the part of God's written word that already existed at that time that Isaiah is referring to, and the people would have, or at least should have, known about. Okay, so Isaiah. The vision concerning Judah and... Now, again, I don't know when Isaiah received some of these visions. He's going to give us the date of his call in chapter 6. Okay? So everything he talks about here in chapters 1 through 5, he got these visions after chapter 6. So we know right from the start that the book is not written or arranged chronologically. And there are very few instances. We do get a date in chapter 6, the year King Uzziah died. But there are very few other such instances in the book of Isaiah. I think maybe 2 or 3. Not very many. We have very few instances in Isaiah of Isaiah dating one of his prophecies or something or anything that happens in his book. Most of it is just kind of like a vision that Isaiah recorded, and the context of his vision kind of has to clue us in on what it's talking about. Now, Jeremiah and Ezekiel, the other long prophetic books, will actually provide some chronological data for their ministries. We're not going to be as in the dark about when they received their visions as we are with Isaiah. Isaiah, we're just going to have to infer a lot of it from the message itself. These other prophetic, the long ones at least, the long ones are going to be a lot more helpful in giving us chronological markers that we can use to follow along with the story in a way that we like chronology. We like thinking of our stories in lines. We like starting here and going here. Okay, Isaiah doesn't do that. Isaiah is not interested in that. And he's not going to help us do that. Like Isaiah is not going to make any effort to help us understand his vision in the way that we want to understand it. He's not going to do that. Okay, so we have to be aware of that before we get started. So the beginning of Isaiah is not the first part of his ministry. The first thing that happens in his ministry is actually in chapter 6. So here at the beginning of the book, we're getting something that he would have, a vision he would have received, or a message that he would have written sometime after. I don't know how long after. Maybe it was the very next day. I don't know. Okay, it's like maybe it was at the end of his ministry. I personally think that the first 5 chapters of Isaiah were written as kind of like a prologue to the rest of the book, sometime pretty close to the end of Isaiah's ministry as he was preparing to put this all down in writing. That's my personal belief. But I have no idea, frankly. Okay, I know that the first thing that happened in his ministry is in Isaiah 6. But in terms of how he got the message from Isaiah 1 to 5, it's conjecture. Okay, I just told you my best guess. Isaiah didn't give us that information. And so anything that any speculation that we offer can only ever be speculation. At least until we meet Isaiah and we ask him. Okay, so Isaiah 1, verse 1. The vision concerning Judah and Jerusalem that Isaiah, son of Amoz, saw during again, that's Amoz, not Amos, the prophet Amos, not the same guy, not the same name. Isaiah was not the son of Amos the prophet. We have no idea who Amoz was. So this is the vision that he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. That's important. Everything that we read from here through the end of chapter 66, which how many verses are in chapter 66? 16 verses maybe? No, 24 verses. Everything from this verse to chapter 66, verse 24, as we number it, of course, is the original. Another thing about Isaiah, one more point. Isaiah is a long book. It has a lot of content in it. There's a lot of visions in it. These visions are not generally dated. We're going to get to a point, especially later on, where he's just going to kind of keep talking and talking and talking and talking and talking and talking and talking. Apparently without a break. It's hard to say. And not only that, but our chapter divisions, of course, the original scrolls wouldn't have had chapters. We added the chapter and verses later on, are not really all that helpful. Isaiah is one of those books in the Bible. The chapter divisions are probably less helpful here than they are in many other places. We're going to get to a point later on where the chapter divisions actually are going to be kind of in the way. We in our minds, we're accustomed to taking each chapter as like a block of thought. But there's going to be points later on where the chapter breaks don't accurately kind of break off sections of thought like they should. So the chapter breaks are going to be actually not only less helpful than they usually are, but actually they're going to get to the point where they're actually going to be harmful to our understanding of the text. That's just another difficulty we're going to have with Isaiah. Anyway, so we know that from here to the end of the last word of the last verse, everything that Isaiah is going to speak, this whole vision that he's got here, which begins here and is going to continue on through the end of the book, concerns Judah and Jerusalem. He's going to talk about more than that. He's going to have a lot to say about more than just Judah and Jerusalem. But everything that he says is in the context of how it concerns Judah and Jerusalem. So the vision concerning Judah and Jerusalem that Isaiah son of Amoz saw during the reigns of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. We read about these guys when we covered the historical material, so we should have that historical background already, fresh in our minds. In short, Uzziah was a good king who reigned for a long time. He had a breakdown near the end, but he was otherwise a good king. Jotham was his son, and he was also a good king, although a somewhat mediocre one. Ahaz was his son, and he was a very wicked king, probably the most wicked king they had up to that point in time in the south. And Hezekiah is his son, he becomes a good king.